Today's Washington Tech episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And also Warby Parker. Get a free 5-day home try-on at warbyparkertrial.com/Joe. 5 pairs, 5 days, and the try-on is 100% free. That's warbyparkertrial.com/Joe.
Arizona is a microcosm that went from 10 years ago being like the epicenter of hate that everybody looked at, boycotts, protests, massive legal action, to now being a battleground state.
Welcome to the Washington Tech Policy Podcast. We deliver the latest tech policy news and brightest tech policy experts to you, wherever you are, so you can stay productive, relevant, and informed in less time. From Washington, D.C., it's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The FCC signals that it will approve the Sprint T-Mobile merger. China's Huawei has a tough week as President Trump limits its U.S.-based business, and Luis Avila is my guest. The Trump administration appears divided over whether to approve the Sprint T-Mobile merger. The companies say if the merger is approved, they'll have 5G built out to the entire country in 6 years. Sprint says they'll also sell prepaid wireless company Boost Mobile. FCC Chair Ajit Pai says the merger conditions the companies are proposing are adequate and said he'd approve the deal. The 2 other Republicans on the commission signaled their support as well, giving the deal the majority it needs at the FCC. Policy expert Gigi Sohn says, though, that over at the DOJ's Antitrust Division, Assistant Attorney General Makan Delrahim is saying the conditions aren't enough. Chinese device manufacturer Huawei had a tough week last week as President Trump, tough week this week too, as President Trump last Wednesday signed an executive order that bans American telecom companies from installing foreign-made equipment that could pose a national security threat. American officials have accused the company of violating an American trade embargo against Iran and with assisting China with spying on U.S. companies. Since Trump issued the order, Google parent Alphabet has suspended doing business with Huawei outside of what's available via open source by revoking the Android licensing deal the tech giant had with Huawei. Looks like the White House wants to set up its own social network to compete with Twitter and Facebook. The White House has created a creepy new database that lets conservatives report instances in which they've been censored on social media platforms. The president is attempting to get users to opt in to a separate White House newsletter that purports to allow anyone, irrespective of their political views, to receive updates without relying on Facebook and Twitter. He also decided not to sign on to a multinational campaign created by Christchurch, New Zealand, to stamp out online hate speech. The White House says the effort would dilute the freedom of speech. 18 other countries, including many of America's allies, disagreed. Johns Hopkins has released a free online course where users can learn how to prevent and protect against gun violence. The course contains 6 modules taught by experts, including mental health professionals. It's entitled Reducing Gun Violence in America, Evidence for Change, and it's intended to equip students to use research to combat gun violence in America. Major wireless carriers, including AT&T and Verizon, have claimed that they have stopped sharing geolocation data with third-party bounty hunters. But the facts suggest otherwise. Congressman Mike Doyle notes that the number of complaints about police departments and other unauthorized and unconstitutional, for that matter, surveillance of individuals has been on the rise. AT&T has acknowledged that it took advantage of a loophole in a Communications Act privacy provision that doesn't cover a type of geolocation data known as AGPS, which AT&T's Joan Marsh says is less precise than the location data covered by the National Emergency Address Database. Finally, San Francisco became the first city to ban the use of facial recognition technology. The ordinance passed by a vote of 8-1 and is headed to Mayor London Breed for her signature. Events. There's a lot going on this week, so let's get started. Today, May 21st, there's an event over at New America. 740 15th Street Northwest. 2019 Ranking Digital Rights Corporate Accountability Index. That starts at 9:30 and goes till 11. The House Judiciary Committee is having a full committee hearing at 10 a.m. called Understanding the Digital Advertising Ecosystem. It's a privacy-focused hearing, and that's at Dirksen Room 226. The House Homeland Security Committee is having a growing and diversifying our cyber talent pipeline, 310 Cannon, 2 p.m. City Year is having its gala tonight, the Idealist Gala at the Reagan Building, 1300 Pennsylvania, 6 p.m. reception, 7 p.m. program and dinner. Over at the MIT Enterprise Forum at 600 Mass Ave, celebrating entrepreneurship in our nation's capital. That starts at 5:30. Turning to Wednesday, tomorrow, May 22nd, Partnership for Progress on the Digital Divide Conference goes through 5/24. Vince Cerf is going to keynote that, and it's at Georgetown University Law Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy, and that's at 37th and O. The House Oversight Committee is having a hearing, 2154 Rayburn, facial recognition technology. That starts at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. House Energy and Commerce is having a full committee hearing on Lift America, modernizing the infrastructure. That's at 2123 Rayburn at 10 a.m. Then on next Tuesday, May 28th, NYU's Center for Critical Race and Digital Studies is having 2019 Critical Race and Digital Studies Conference over at their NYU DC location at 1307 L Street from 9 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And then on Saturday, June 1st, DC STEM Network is having the DC STEM Fair at UDC. That's at 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you can find links to all the stories in the show notes and also the events in our Twitter feed. And our handle is @WashingTech. Also, check out the show notes as well. You can find those at techpolicypodcast.com. Stay with us. Audible's giving you an opportunity to check out their service for free for 30 days. They've got pretty much any book you want. Rarely have a problem finding what I need. How about The Devil's Highway, a true story by Luis Alberto Urrea? You can download The Devil's Highway free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book.
Washington, the inclusive voice of tech policy. Because America won't stand still for the same old insiders. Washington, moving the needle.
My guest today is Luis Avila, president and founder of Iconico Campaigns, a company that works to build advocacy capacity in organizations around the country. Migrating in 2000 from Mexico, Luis stayed in the U.S. to attend college, where he developed projects with people involved in arts, politics, and social justice. In 2004, Luis learned about civic participation as part of an American Freedom Summer Camp in Jackson, Mississippi. He worked with organizers and leaders to advocate for the DREAM Act, fight against SB 1070, and challenge Sheriff Joe Arpaio's discriminatory practices in Arizona. He's also worked on the Obama campaign, Somos América, and he's on the boards of advisors for NCLR and the New Teacher Project. Luis, welcome.
Hello, Joe. Thank you for the opportunity.
So you have an awesome new organization, Instituto, that I want everyone to know about. It's for voters in Arizona. But first, give us a sense of, what's happening in Arizona that's created the need for an organization like Instituto to take action.
So, Joe, really quick, I worked in 2016 in the coordinated campaign in Nevada. And when we started seeing the election results, I started talking to friends who were going to be impacted by the election of Trump. And one of the friends that I called told me something that really changed the way that I saw Arizona and the reason why we're doing this work. And that's that, in 2010, Arizona was in the middle of the eye of the hurricane. We had anti-immigrant legislation, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, all this horrible anti-immigrant rhetoric, and to be honest, pretty bad policy. And my friend told me, you know what, Luis, what's about to happen in the rest of the country, we already lived that in Arizona. We're actually ahead of the game. And Arizona is that. Arizona is a microcosm that went from 10 years ago being like the epicenter of hate that everybody looked at, boycotts, protests, massive legal action, to now being a battleground state, electing a Democratic senator, about to elect a second one for this next election, a huge battleground state with 2/3 of their voters in one county, much cheaper market than other places we've invested traditionally. Arizona, it's at play, and we have to get ready for that. And we also locally have to think about how this election helps us build community. So we're excited about 2020. We think it's a unique opportunity to develop talent, to mobilize voters that are usually left out of the conversation, but also to build a political infrastructure. So we don't only win in 2020, but we win in 2022 and beyond.
So tell us about how Instituto is going to help do that.
Instituto basically does two things. It accelerates the current organizations that exist in Arizona. So I'm working with a lot of 501c4s and local leaders, 501c3s that want to scale their programs and want to figure out, how do we integrate better data programs, digital programs, how do we engage volunteers better, how to support voters and provide them with better information. So we're accelerating the work of what exists already. But on the other side, we're also incubating the organizations that do not exist because we're a new battleground state. So we're thinking about content creation that it's appealing to local voters. How do we also develop new training programs that have campaign managers ready for the time when it comes? How do we create organizations that are able to actually catch resources and distribute them with organizations and the people who are actually doing the work that is closer to the ground? So we're getting ahead of the game. I think we can actually be a model for how a battleground state can be built in the future.
And we're seeing a lot of battleground states. I mean, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the usual suspects. Arizona is new. And even in D.C. that are typically Democratic, a lot of listeners here are very civic minded. You have a lot of policy workers on the state, local, and even the federal level. What are some ways that we can partner with Instituto? How can we help address some of the more ongoing programs in our own communities, but then also help you advance your agenda in Arizona?
Thanks, Joe, for that question. Look, I would say put Arizona on the map. The first thing that I would ask your listeners is to invest in Arizona, invest in organizations that are in Arizona, pay attention to the work that people like the One Arizona Table are doing, register hundreds of thousands of voters. Lucha, one of the organization that increased the minimum wage in the state of Arizona, Poder, working on the grassroots to elect city councils and getting involved in the statewide elections. So pay attention to these organizations. They're actually the future of what's looking like being civic-minded organizations in the United States. Invest in them, but also come to Arizona. I mean, we have a primary election that is going to be very important for the presidential. If you have a candidate you support, come to Arizona early, talk to voters here, learn about our state, and also support the candidate that you're supporting. So we have an election right a week after Super Tuesday, which is going to be really critical to decide who's going to be the Democratic nominee. And finally, I would say if you're working with tools or innovations or things that help us as organizations and leaders just be better at contacting voters and volunteers, reach out to Instituto and let us know how those tools could support the work that we're doing. We are a new battleground state. We are in some ways ahead of the game when it comes to the work that we do to build communities. But we also need the support of tools that help us make our work more efficient. So we're looking for help from outside of the state to find some of those innovations as well.
And tell us about your process. What's the process that you apply to improve voting in Arizona?
Well, there are a few things, right? The first one is that we just have to break away from this duality or mentality that only we can engage white voters in the suburbs, middle of the road voters, or that we have to engage communities of color and, at times communities that having historically increasing voter participation every cycle, but that we always are presented with this question of is it one or the other? We have to break away from that, Joe. We have to be smarter than that. If we're going to really create the party and a movement that we need to govern in the future, we're going to have to expand our tent. So what I would say is in Instituto, what we're trying to do is to bring closer those two approaches to the center and say, let's have a conversation about how do we do both. So we are targeting legislative districts that we know are people who are going to need a lot more white suburban voters and suburban voters in general to win the elections, to be in communication with organizations and groups that are working in more marginalized communities so that they can pick up the phone and reach out to each other and have relationships. But we're also identifying talent. One of the biggest problems we have with this kind of battleground mentality is that talent leaves a state or comes into a state in a very kind of cyclical way. So the year after election, we're actually out of talent in many places. I think the Republicans do a really good job at breaking away from that by actually creating institutions in the states that matter politically for them so that they can retain talent and also kind of strengthen their policy abilities. They have think tanks, they have digital firms, they have communication firms. They're actually able to do a lot more with the talent that is in their cities or in their communities, in their states. As Democrats, as people, as progressives, we have to think about more about this as a human capital issue. So in Instituto, we're thinking about how do we solve some of these big challenges that we see every cycle by investing with this upcoming election that is going to bring more resources than ever to our state so that we can capture the talent, we can retain the talent in the state, but we can also create more proximity and an exchange of ideas between people who are working with different communities.
So for folks who want to form an organization that's similar to Instituto, describe the process for us. What are kind of the step-by-steps to set up the organization?
Well, the first thing that I did, Joe, to start Instituto is that actually I spoke to a bunch of people in the first 3 months before launching the idea. I spoke to over 80 individuals in the state and in other battleground states. And before I created a framework or before I thought about how we were going to create this organization, I actually kind of followed up a startup model, right? I tried a few trainings, I piloted a few platforms, and I saw what worked and didn't work. I also did some research. We did interviews, we did surveys. So we try to analyze what were the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes that people in the state of Arizona needed to be ready for 2020. And once we identified those, we realized that we needed a fellowship. So we created a fellowship and we started talking about it. And we created a training program that is kind of pretty rich and robust that helps people run large-scale campaigns. But we also are working with executive directors because they also need some training and ongoing education. A lot of these leaders jumped at leadership in campaigns or in advocacy work at a very young age out of need and excitement, and we haven't given them the investment and support that they deserve. So that's how we arrive at where we are now: interviews, surveys, reaching out, asking good questions, and then formulating the idea after that.
Well, Luis, obviously very important work, and looking forward to supporting you and connecting you and others with you to help you achieve your goals with your new organization. So thanks for joining me, sir.
Joe, thank you so much for the chance, and I hope to see you in Arizona someday.
Now let's turn to your icebreaker. I love Arizona. Now let's turn to your icebreaker, your career advice, and your pick for our book this week. Okay, so it's time for this week's icebreaker. Tell me something that's true that almost no one agrees with you on.
You know, something that is true is that I have an ongoing tension about public institutions and the things we can do about outside of them. I always talk about schooling, for example, and how I think that schools, public schools, should be supported and invested on. But I also think that I should be able to start my own school and create my own curriculum. So I support things like charter schools. And that's something that I am always kind of in dialogue and in debate with friends and with people who work in the same space. So I think we have to be more nuanced at the way that we look at the future, the way that we look at policy, the way that we look at our agency and how we create institutions that help people around us, but that also are owned by the people who are most impacted as well.
And to your point about education, I think the idea that I think that's true that almost no one agrees with on, at least in DC, where it's very sort of status conscious and pedigree conscious, is the idea of meritocracy and how meritocracy is said to work, but how it actually works. Very
right.
much tied to race and class. So outside of Instituto, you have your own firm in Iconico campaigns. Tell us about that, and what are some key pieces of advice for folks listening who are thinking about going out on their own?
So I've been on the consulting business for a while, Joe, and one thing that I learned is that my business model was based on how long I retain clients. And I just realized that I was creating dependencies with people who could actually do the work without me. So I approached this as an organizer. And what I did is that I created a firm that sets up contracts that are much shorter, but with the intention of the success rate being how fast I can get out of the contract by leaving something behind that allows these organizations to do things without me. That has changed the game for me. Iconico is a really successful company. We're working actually in the United States and in other parts of the world, helping nonprofits and individuals who want to run large bulk campaigns, and how do they do that in a successful way while keep doing it when we're gone. So the way that I approach that is the same thing that I approach with Instituto, Joe. I did a bunch of interviews and conversations, and I realized where gaps were. And then I created this firm so that I could do more work and continue to innovate as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that, you want to get people working on their own and then exit as opposed to devoting all those hours and accumulating clients and then running out of the bandwidth to handle all of them.
Yeah, then we become just like business developers, and all we're doing is selling because we have to, keep feeding the giant.
Right.
Instead, I want to stay agile enough where I can actually work on things that excite me, make enough capital so that I can invest in innovations and in communities that I see as necessary to invest on. And at the same time, like to be able to choose what I want to work for and what I don't want to work for.
Interesting. So what are you reading or watching these days?
Well, a ton of things actually, but there are a couple of things that I was just thinking about over the weekend. One of them is these short documentaries about an hour from Vice called The Future of Work. It actually made me think about how much of the conversation around education, policy development, technology, it's actually based on the future that we're going to have to think about of the workforce. And I don't think we do that enough. Our policy approach is kind of very episodic. It's very on the now. And while that is important, putting urgency, we have to think about how our policy decisions are actually impacting communities on the margins in the future. So that's something that just, really made me think about the way that I approach policy. And the second thing is a book that I'm really enjoying called Vanishing Frontiers. And it's a book about the kind of symbiotic relationship between Mexico and the United States. And I'm actually an immigrant from Mexico, a proud citizen of the U.S. too. But something that I haven't ever realized is how much do we depend in both economies on the cultural, economic exchange of the two nations, and how much of our American economy actually depends on Mexico. So it was a really rich book for me to learn more about the places where I think we can leverage a little bit more of the power that both economies have on each other, but also just learn from our neighbor, and in my case, from the place where my family go home.
Yeah. The way we treat Mexico is just deplorable. So hope to see some improvement there, which really sort of underscores the importance of the 2020 election once again. Do you have any final ideas you'd like to leave with us before we close? And where can folks find you online?
We should not continue to do the same playbook. It's not taking us to places of success, of community development and empowerment. We should actually look at new ways to do things so we can create to build a larger, more sustainable, powerful community across the country. And, people can find me either at Iconico, it's like Iconic with an O at the end, .io, iconico.io, or Instituto, like Institute in Spanish.io. On both places, you can see our social media, and you can email us as well. And thank you so much for the time, Joe.
Yeah, anytime. And you've been listening to Luis Avila, president and founder of Iconico Campaigns. We're owning our campaigns. Luis, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Joe. Have a good one.
That concludes episode 186 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Can you do me a favor? Can you head over, please, to Apple Podcasts if you like the show? Even if you don't like the show, give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from us and really helps us out. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.
Washington.